Hey sinners, I'm Megan.
And I'm Lindsay, and this is Sinners Among Saints.
Welcome to another episode of Sinners Among Saints. How's your week?
Oh man, it's been crazy busy, but good. We started watching the new the new documentary on Netflix about Lori Vallows.
Oh, I've been wanting to watch that.
The Sins of Our Mother.
Uh-huh.
And it's only a couple episodes, so it doesn't take very long.
Okay.
But it was entertaining. I'm excited to see what happens, like, with the trial.
Yeah, me too.
She is crazy.
Oh, I mean, she would have to be. And in this documentary, isn't it her oldest son?
Yeah. Her oldest son, Colby, and then it has her mom and her sister in part of it. And it's just insane. Like, I knew some of the stuff, but then just seeing it all together in the documentary is like a totally different thing for me.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, I'm sure the whole country, but, like, we live in Utah, so we're kind of close, and it's like you see a little bit at a time as it's unfolding, but when you sit down, I'm sure, and watch, like, all of it at once, it's like, what in the hell?
Yeah, and it's like, it's kind of sad because, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's somebody close to her that, like, knew she was going crazy and tried to get everybody involved, and it just didn't work out that way. And then at one point, I do have to say this part, so spoiler alert if anyone, wants to move ahead a little bit, but she actually tells the police that one of her best friends has the kids. And I was just thinking, and I'm like, okay, if you ever called me and, like, needed me to hide a body or help you with some shady shit, I'd be there, right?
Yeah.
But if you called me and told me, like, hey, the police are going to be calling you, I told them that you have my kids, when I didn't, I'd be like, no, like, I don't think I could lie for you.
No, like, when it comes to the kids, I feel like that's a different level.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty ride or die, but if I found out that your kids were, like, missing and nobody knew where they were, and then you were trying to bring me into it, I'd be like, no, we're not that close.
Yeah, no. But it's insane to me. I mean, and you see more cases, where women, like, get a new boyfriend or a new husband or whatever, and then it's like, oh, the kids are too much. Like, they're baggage, so we're just gonna get rid of them.
Or demons in her case.
Oh, yeah.
It's bizarre, but it's really kind of sad because you hear her oldest son and his perspective, and it just pulls at your
I can't even
heartstrings.
imagine.
It's really sad.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
It's good, and I'm excited to see now where the trial actually goes.
Yeah.
And follow it more closely.
Yeah, I've been wanting to watch that. We're trying to finish Only Murders in the Building, so.
Oh my gosh, we are still on the second season, and I'm obsessed with it.
I love it. I want to be best friends with Steve Martin and Martin Short and even Selena Gomez. Like,
you
they're
kind
just
of want to
so.
be Selena.
Oh my gosh, it's just a great show.
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched it, you should. We have one episode left actually, so
it's so
we're
good.
right on the very last, and so.
And, like, give it a couple episodes because the first episode I couldn't get into, and I was like, what's the hype? It is so good when you start actually watching it. It's so good. It's kind of like The Office. It grows on you.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Maybe like us. Maybe.
I hope so. Please keep listening.
We are working out a lot of our kinks, people.
Uh-huh.
We ordered another microphone. This is like our third one. We're going to try some soundproofing stuff. We've had some issues with sound, so just bear with us.
Yeah, and it's a lot more than you think when you first start, like, recording. So please, like, bear with. I'm sure we'll get better. If we don't, please tell us.
Constructive criticism is accepted. Being assholes is not.
Exactly. Okay. Okay, so if anyone can hear the howling in the background, my son, who is 5, is having a bit of a meltdown. So please, disregard. He's fine. Just having some YouTube issues, so it's fine. Okay, so this is our 3rd episode, right?
Yeah.
3rd episode. So I am going to talk about Floyd Eugene Maestas. This case I had never heard of, even though it kind of wrapped up in the 2000s, and then, the very culmination of the end was just a few years ago, but I had never heard of it. So,
I have heard of this.
Yeah.
I don't remember all the details, but I remember being horrified by some of the things that came out on the news about this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did not look anything back up because I want to be shocked again. But I remember when this came out and I was shocked that somebody could be so depraved.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely interesting doing the research. So let's just get right into it. So Floyd Eugene Maestas was born November 20th, 1955 in the Mexican Flats in Durango, Colorado. And that was a pretty poor community from what I read. He was the 5th of 7 children, born to Francis Adelina Montano Maestas and Joe Maestas, or Jr., as he was called. Mr. Maestas had several children from a previous relationship. And from all accounts, he was a drunk. He was super violent. A lot of people referred to him as a drunk who beat his wife and kids.
Aww.
So he was, all around a good guy.
That's how I'd want to be known.
Right? Me too. So Floyd had an older sister, Martha, who passed away at just 1 day old. And she was born in 1951. I couldn't find anything as to what happened or why or whatever. I'm guessing it was just natural causes, but couldn't find anything else. And then he had another sister. Her name was Charlotte, and she was 6.5 years older than him. And there was a couple accounts that I read where she was suspected of molesting him. But at the very end, when he's in trial and everything, he talks about how he doesn't want to bring his family into the trial, and says that any suspicions of him being molested as a child are not true. So I don't know if it's true or if it's not. Either way, they all seem like they had a pretty terrible childhood. So this is, I think, aside from, living with a drunk, violent dad, in 1963, when he was about 7 years old, his sister, Charlotte, at the time was 14. She was pregnant, and her boyfriend was 19 years old. And during an argument, he stabbed her to death with a letter opener in front of Floyd.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that was kind of his first, first time witnessing a death was his own sister.
Oh, and his 14-year-old pregnant sister.
Yeah.
Oh,
pregnant
terrible.
at 14. And to be stabbed to death with a letter opener?
Oh.
I feel
sometimes I can barely get letters open. I mean, I don't use a letter opener, by the way, but I have before at work, because we have them and it makes me feel fancy.
Yeah.
But sometimes I can't even get an envelope open.
Yeah, they're not super sharp.
No.
And they're skinny, so I feel there's got to be, you either puncture just the right area, or you got to do it a few times.
Because you'd think it would almost bend.
Yeah. Well, you see cases where people stab with a knife and it bends. So, yeah, it's pretty terrible. So shortly after that, in 1966, his parents separated, and Frances took her remaining children to Salt Lake City. Lucky us. So right at about, just a few months after they moved back to Salt Lake in November 1966 was Floyd's first run-in with police. He was 11 years old. And it said in the stuff I read, it said his brother Eugene and him broke into a home. But remember, his middle name is Eugene, so I don't know if there's Floyd Eugene Maestas and then just a Eugene Maestas. Like, they were, I don't know. To me, I feel like it's weird. They're, like, running out of names, but it did say his brother Eugene and him broke into a home, and they stole a piggy bank that contained $20 in pennies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was all they took, but...
That's all they needed.
Right, yeah. And at that time, now, I don't know, like, it said he'd missed 22 days of school. So you're, like, in November, you haven't been in school for very long. But they also, I don't know how long they had lived here.
Okay.
So I don't know, like, if that has anything to do with it, but he had been out of school for the majority of the time it had been back in session, so... and the rest of his youth, they said, was contained with nothing but theft and public drunkenness. So, sounded like he was living life a lot like his dad.
I was going to say, following in the father's footsteps.
Right, yeah. Okay, so in 1974 is where, like, everything kind of begins. He was 19, and him and a group of boys broke into 64-year-old Donna Jensen's home. They savagely beat and raped her. Now, there's a story. So 30 years later, Bruce Hansen, who was Donna's nephew, he recounted, like, that night. And he said, Donna, who was his aunt, but she raised him as her own, he said every night he would stop at her house on his way home to visit. And that night he was passing her house. He saw her curtains were drawn and the house was dark. And he said for whatever reason he didn't visit.
Oh, no.
And he said 30 years later, I still can't forgive myself for that.
Oh, that poor man.
Right? So
like
awful.
That guilt.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
So awful. So her injuries were broken ribs, internal bleeding, multiple bite wounds, and a doctor had to sew one of her nipples back on.
Okay, I remember hearing about this part, and I was like, it takes a lot of force. Like, did they cut the nipple off? Did they pull it off? Did you find anything about this?
No, it didn't. No.
Okay, because I remember hearing about this in the news, and I was like, when the later stuff happens,
yeah,
and they recounted this, and I was like, I just want to know how. I know that sounds terrible, but I want to know how, because
did they bite it off?
Exactly. Did they bite it off? Like, how? It takes a lot of force to get somebody's nipple off.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I would hope mine doesn't just pop off.
Right? I mean, they're pretty durable.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, when I saw that, and the bite wounds, like, that to me is, like, a whole different, like, psychology to, like, bite people. I don't know. Like, that to me, for some reason, is just always super creepy.
And it was how many kids? How many men?
It didn't say, it just said a group.
A group.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't know how many were there, but...
Ugh.
So, after it happened, Bruce, the nephew, had received information from some young neighbors that Floyd Maestas was involved. So, in regards to Maestas being involved, the police said, and Bruce said that he remembers this clearly. The police officer said that very well could be, because that's his calling card. So, at that point, Bruce realized that this was not Floyd's first elderly victim. So because they, for whatever reason, couldn't prove who had committed the physical assault, Maestas was only charged with burglary.
What?
Yeah. So this poor woman
got her nipple somehow ripped off, and nobody is going to pay the price for this?
She's 64 years old, like broken ribs, like internal bleeding, and I'm sorry, but like, if you can't figure out of the group who did it, how about they just all go to prison
just all of them.
For sexual assault?
Agreed.
Like, that to me is insane. The only somewhat good thing out of it was it did send Floyd to prison for the first time on a 5-year sentence. The only thing is that he only served 18 months and was paroled in July of 1976.
So could Donna not identify any of them?
No.
Oh.
No. And, I mean, it's the 70s, so, DNA evidence, all that kind of stuff is not where it is today. So, yeah, they just got burglary, and that was it.
18 months.
And then 18 months out of his 5-year sentence.
Cool.
Right. So on October 13th, 1976, he broke into the home of 79-year-old Alinda McLean. And for 2 hours and 45 minutes, she was brutally raped and beaten before he stole her TV and a few other things.
Wait, what year was this?
1976.
Okay.
So he stole her TV and a few other things, but before leaving the house, he took a piece of a shattered light bulb and gouged out her right eye. Yeah. And after the attack, as she lay in the hospital, she was able to describe Maestas so well, police soon found him, and he still had her TV with him. So her granddaughter, Geraldine, and I don't know if it's Camolo or Camoyo, but she recalled as she sat next to her grandmother, cleaning her cut and bruised hands, saying she was unrecognizable when she got to the hospital. She said she fought so hard that all that blood was way down into the quick. I just always assumed society would take care of him and keep him in prison. But what you'll soon learn is that he never gets, anything done to him. I mean, he does, but not...
does he serve time for this?
So, he does, but he gets a deal that drops the rape and assault charges. So he's only found guilty of theft, and he serves less than 6 years.
So this asshole has done this to multiple women and literally never gotten charged for anything but burglary and theft.
Yeah, essentially. And the only reason why he even served close to the 6 years was because the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole ruled that the bargained penalties were way out of line when compared to some of those he was charged with. So, I mean, at least the parole board essentially was like, no.
Yeah.
This is some shit. He needs to serve more time.
I'm serving at least 6 years.
Yeah. So he went to prison for less than 6 years for that one.
It's really times like these where I wish it was eye for an eye still, because I want somebody to rip his nipple off and gouge his eye out with a light bulb.
Yeah.
And bite him all over and rape him.
Right, and I don't, how these lawyers, how do you make a deal with someone? You can see his rap sheet. It's not like you can't look and see that stuff and then be like, well, let's drop the rape and assault and you'll just get theft.
Yeah, I mean, I get that we need a justice system and that even offenders need lawyers, but these lawyers, I don't know how they live with themselves.
No.
I really don't.
I don't either.
I don't know how you sleep at night.
No. And is it really justice if, you're giving rapists, a deal?
No, and then they just get out and do it again, obviously.
Yeah, it's not like this is his first offense.
It's terrible.
No. So, between 1984 and 1989, he was sent to and released from prison 5 times for parole violations, theft, and burglary. So, in 5 years, he's, sent to and from prison 5 times. And in 1989, so this is, I don't know, there's so many weird things with him, and I don't understand, why it's so hard for them to just put him away way before they finally do. So in 1989, he's suspected of at least 3 burglaries, including the attack on Leon Nelson, who never had her case filed. She stated, "At the time, a detective showed me his rap sheet and said, 'Listen, this is all this guy needs to be put away forever.' Nelson says, 'I believed him and my family and I thought things were going to be taken care of.'" But he never, they didn't even file her case. Didn't even...
Wait, so she was brave enough to come forward and be a witness. Did he rape her too?
It didn't say. It just says
it was never filed. So
yeah, and it said. So of all the cases that he was suspected of in 1989, only one was filed, and the one that was filed was one that involved 3 sisters who were on their way home. They were coming home from church to make baklava. Their last name, I believe, was Dimitropoulos. And they ran into him, like, before anything happened, and they chased him out of the house. So nothing, like, he didn't steal anything from them. I mean, he broke into their house, but he didn't assault them, like, nothing. And that was the only case that ended up getting filed out of the 3. And it did say somewhere, I read that at least one of those cases there was rape. So Greg Skordas, then a deputy prosecutor, says, I can't remember why only one of the 3 cases was filed. I can't honestly give you a good answer. I just don't know why we did what we did. Noting that the cases are 15 years ago, he says, it makes me sick, you know. You try to be a tough prosecutor and do what is right, and sometimes that means trying to hold him for as long as possible, and that's the best you can hope for. Which,
at least he, like, kind of owns up to it.
For sure, and he's like, you know, I honestly can't tell you why we did what we did. That was 15 years ago, and he, you know, said, like, I prosecuted thousands of cases in the last 15 years, so I can't really tell you. But obviously we didn't do good, you know.
Clearly.
Yeah, clearly. But somehow, like, time and time again, all of his crimes, like, he gets these deals that repeatedly transform his, like, first-degree felony violence charges to, like, second- and third-degree property crimes. And I just really don't understand.
Like, how does this keep happening?
No. And I feel like, I'm not going to name any names, I feel like I know people in, like, my personal life that, like, continue to get away with things over and over and over again. And, like, they're not doing what they should, or they, like, you know, I don't know. And it's like, if I did a quarter of that stuff, I'd be in prison forever.
Yeah. Our luck, it would be, like,
for sure,
the one time we got caught and we got, like, maxed.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But somehow these, like, just horrible, shitty people can just continue to do stuff, and they're like, well, and I mean,
prisons are a little full, so
yeah.
we'll let the rape slide this time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I know, like, that all of that stuff, there's more to it than just, like, what you see happens, but, I mean, come on, guys, like, you just do better.
You've got to do better than that.
Try harder.
Quit letting people go on rape charges, please. Let the burglary go.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, you know?
Yeah. And so on top of, like, never getting charged for a violent crime, he never serves his maximum sentences either. So it's like every little thing he just gets off on somehow. So in 1989, he received a 1 to 15 sentence for theft, burglary, and being a habitual criminal, but he only served 9 years of that, being paroled in 1989.
Wait, I'm sorry. There's a charge for being a habitual criminal?
Apparently. They're like, man,
good to know.
You keep doing this shit over and over and over. So, yeah, I mean, apparently. Or maybe they just looked at his rap sheet and they were like, oh... he keeps doing stuff. So in early 2000, he's back in prison for breaking into the home of a Salt Lake couple. And this is his only known crime where it didn't involve an elderly female victim.
Okay.
So it didn't say any more about, like, what happened, if there was, I have no idea. It just said that he was back in prison, and he received a 1 to 5 year sentence. But of course, he gets released September 7th, 2004, 9 months early, and with no supervision.
Of course.
Because, you know, he's super trustworthy. Like,
yeah. Stand-up citizen.
He doesn't need parole.
And he's just well rehabilitated.
Right, yeah.
In our system.
Yeah, he does so good. So, 3 weeks later, Maestas is now 49, and he's out driving around with William Hugh Irish and Rodney Roy Renzo. That's a really hard name to say.
Say that 5 times fast.
I don't want to. And they were both 19. So, first off, like, no.
Wait, he's 49?
Yeah.
Hanging out with some 19-year-olds?
I know. Like, I'm 38, and I don't want to hang out with 19-year-olds.
No.
So, I don't know. But they needed money, of course, right? Because, like, who doesn't need money? So they decide to rob someone. That's, what you do. So this is where it gets, pretty... I mean, they're all pretty terrible, but this is, the worst of the worst. So they break into the home of 75-year-old Donna Lou Bott. She was asleep, and according to court documents, Mr. Irish says he witnessed Maesta on top of the woman with a pillow over her face, who was struggling and screaming. Irish said that Maestas threatened to stab her if she didn't tell him where he could find some money. And then Mr. Renzo stated that he witnessed Maesta punching and stomping the woman on the ground over and over. Yeah. So, Renzo said once Maestas had stopped, she was no longer moving, and at that point they just left her home. They didn't take anything.
They just broke in, he beat the crap out of her, and then they left.
Yeah, essentially. Now, I'm going to say kind of what they did after, and then I'll kind of go back to her.
Okay.
So, they break in. According to the two younger ones, Maestas, beats the crap out of her. There was a couple accounts that said that, the two younger boys kind of walked around the house and, tried to find some, one of them found some change and, just, random things to steal. Well, they didn't get, anything.
Because she's just this poor, sweet little 79-year-old grandma who's probably on Social Security and doesn't have money.
Yeah. And I honestly don't know how he always finds, that these are, old ladies by themselves. I don't know if he cases people's houses or how that works, because I find it very interesting that he just breaks into these houses randomly, and it's always old women.
Because he's targeting people
for sure
that he knows he can overpower.
Right, yeah. Because people like him, it's either children or old people.
Yeah.
Because they know someone their own age would kill him. So after they leave Donna's house, they went directly to 84-year-old Virginia Chamberlain's home, who was about 4 blocks away. They broke her window. They jumped through. Maestas immediately pulled her shirt up over her head, catching her skin on her arm and causing it to bleed pretty bad. Aww. So you know how old people, their skin is like paper. Yeah. You can, it barely
just
sometimes.
Get skin tears all over.
Yeah. He punched her in the face a bunch of times and repeatedly, asked her where her purse was and where he could get money. At which time she pressed her medical alert button, causing them to leave.
Smart.
Right?
So smart.
Yeah, so she pressed that and they ran out. They did end up taking her purse on the way out, but that was it. They didn't end up doing anything else. So 3 days later, a neighbor of Donna's called the police to do a welfare check on her because she was out walking her dog and she noticed that the porch light was still on. There was 3 newspapers on her porch.
Wait, and who was this?
One of Donna Bott's neighbors.
Okay.
And so when she noticed that, she was like, that's weird. Because, there was a time when people would get newspapers on their doorsteps. There might be a lot of people who never had that, but that was really a thing. And so she went, oh, sorry, I just hit something. She went to the door, knocked, nobody answered. And so it kind of freaked her out. So she called the police, and the police showed up, and that's when they found Donna in her room in a pool of blood. So an autopsy later showed that she had fractured teeth, numerous and extensive bruises and abrasions on her chest, shoulders, abdomen, face, knees, and hips. She had a laceration through her lower lip, a 1-inch wide and 3-inch deep stab wound on her face, and bruises consistent with strangulation.
Oh.
Yeah. Her internal injuries showed severe tearing around her heart and a tear in her aorta. And it said, the medical examiner said, although she had been strangled, the cause of death was blunt force trauma. And they stated that Floyd Eugene Maestas had stomped Donna Lou Bott so hard that he ruptured her aorta, causing her death. Yeah.
You guys, let me tell you, that takes a lot of force. A lot of force.
Yeah. Yeah. This poor old lady, for whatever reason, and it said in the autopsy that there was no signs of vaginal trauma or rape. So when the police found her, they did say there was a pair of ripped underwear next to her, but I don't think he ever actually sexually assaulted her, which is, I guess, I don't know.
Something to hold on to, I guess.
I don't really know. But now, after leaving Virginia's house, remember the second lady they went to and robbed her, they were driving and trying to get onto Interstate 15, and his car ran out of gas. So all three of the men abandoned the car and proceeded to kind of go about their business. And police stated they caught up with the men after Renzo and Irish began making phone calls on the phone that they stole from Donna Bott that was in her purse.
Oh my god. Okay, so, like, did you ever watch that show, World's Dumbest Criminals?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like this totally could have been an episode.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like, how dumb are you?
And they said, they found the car on the freeway, that Virginia Chamberlain's wallet was inside, and it had $44. Like, I don't know, like, you had a little bit of money. Back then, that would have filled the car up, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Like, so, I just don't know.
But to think, like, I don't know, just to kind of put that in perspective, you literally just killed a woman, or they didn't kill her, they just beat her up.
Right.
But, I mean, not just, but for $44, and it was basically gas money to do the robbery.
Yeah, well, and it seems like every one of his, break-ins and theft and burglary, like, they never say he gets anything ridiculously good.
Which means he's not doing it for the stuff or the money. It's
like the thrill of, breaking in and then beating up some old ladies.
And being able to overpower somebody.
Yeah, because, I mean, the one lady he got a TV from. But other than that, like, they don't ever state that there's anything. He doesn't get a bunch of money. He doesn't get, like, fancy jewelry.
No, it's all about the thrill and the other stuff that he gets, which is so sick.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. So, after they're caught and they start the investigation, they find fingerprints on the inside of a window at Donna Bott's home that matched Floyd Maestas, and DNA under her fingernails that also matched Maestas and excluded Renzo and Irish. Now you have to remember, this is the early 2000s, so we do have DNA stuff, but I don't know the ins and outs of, like, where we were at with DNA testing then, but it's still, I don't think, was as good as we have, like, now. Because
it's come a long ways.
Yeah, for sure.
Early 2000s, but
because
it was fairly decent.
Yeah, well, and the defense tried to say, like, they tried to get the DNA evidence thrown out, stating that the method that was used was not reliable and that it can only exclude people and not positively say someone is, like, the person in question. And so I kind of looked into it a little bit since, I do medical testing, partially as a living. So the form of DNA testing they did is called YSTR DNA testing. And STR stands for short tandem repeats. And so they look for these repeats on the Y chromosome only. So when I looked it up, it said that the benefits of this testing are to target male only in mixed samples, because they did have just STR DNA testing where you could look at these tandem repeats on the DNA strand, but it wouldn't differentiate between, like, male and female.
Okay.
So if you have, like, these mixed samples, it was hard to decide. You could see it was two different people, but you didn't know, like, male, female, whatever. So this will target males. It will determine the number of male donors in a mixed sample. It's also used to provide clarity for inconclusive STR results. It aids in the power of exclusion. It can detect male DNA from cases involving azoospermic or vasectomized males. So if they don't have any sperm, they can still test for DNA. It will help find saliva even following showers. It said it will determine digital penetration. So any sort of a case where like a person may be assaulted, but there's no like ejaculation or no sperm. And then samples like old rape kits that have like degraded sperm cells. They can use the YSTR testing to determine. And so that was what they used to determine that it for sure, matched Maestas and did not match the other two people, which I think sounds perfectly legitimate to me. But as you'll find out, like as I finish this up, that his defense team really tries like real hard to get like everything thrown out. Like these defense attorneys to me are, I don't know, some of the worst. So ultimately it took about 39 months for Maestas to reach trial. On November 22nd, 2005, Judge Sheila McCleave ruled after a preliminary hearing that there was sufficient evidence to have Maestas stand trial on the charges of capital murder and first-degree felony aggravated burglary. There was a third charge of second-degree felony forcible sexual abuse, and that was set for a further hearing on January 13th, 2006, but I could never find anything that, like, stated whether or not that was one of the things he was standing trial on. So, and I think because with Donna, there was no signs of rape, like, on the autopsy, but the prosecution was trying to say that because there was a ripped pair of underwear and she was found naked from the waist down, that itself was like a sexual assault.
Sure.
So they were trying to get that kind of put in there, but I could never find like whatever happened with that hearing. So essentially he was being charged of the capital murder of Donna Lou Bott and the aggravated burglary of Virginia Chamberlain. So those were the two that he was being indicted for. So both Irish and Renzo took deals to reduce their charges pretty significantly in return for their testimony against Maestas. And that's one thing that, like, the defense tries to hold against, like, the prosecution is that, you can't believe anything these kids say because, like, they're friends and they got these big deals, so they'll say whatever they can just to get out of, like, going to prison. But I still think that all in all, like,
yeah, I mean,
he's 100% guilty.
One thing or one incident,
right?
Then you could kind of see where the defense is coming from. Like, these two other punk kids are getting a good deal,
right?
But it's like the whole picture, right? Like he has.
This is not the first time.
This is multiple offenses.
Well, and it seems like, because, this is the first time, I mean, I guess that we know of. You never know, I guess, 100%. But, like, this is the first murder he's committed. But it seems like he was so angry when he went in there. It was like, to me, it almost seems like, I don't know that he intended to murder when he went in there. I think it was, like, his MO to break in. Like, you beat the ladies up, you steal some shit, and you leave. And for whatever reason, like, he went too far. And then I think when he realized that she was dead, that's why they just kind of, like, pieced out.
Yeah.
And then went somewhere else. And went somewhere else to go rob. Like, it's not to say that he felt bad. I just think he was like, oh, shit. Whoops. Yeah. That was an overreaction. So,
well, and I think it's like, it doesn't take a whole lot when somebody is that frail.
Right.
And so maybe he just didn't realize how.
Oh, for sure.
Or maybe he was just super angry that day.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, obviously he's got some, like, childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So, like, and I know people that have, like, anger issues, and it's almost like if they get into something triggers them or whatever, it's like they're not there anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm not giving him, like, an out at all, because, like, that's stuff that you need to, like, be aware of, but for sure, you can kind of get into that whole, like, you're seeing red kind of a thing and just not that he blacked out, because I felt like he knew exactly what he was doing, but I'm just saying, like, people that have, like, childhood trauma and all sorts of stuff, like, it can mess, I mean, it's not an excuse for your choices as an adult, but it makes you look at it and go, like, oh, I can kind of understand, like, where the psychology of all that comes from.
Yeah.
So when he gets ready to go to trial, of course, he tries to say that he's mentally handicapped and that he should be exempt from the death penalty. To which the courts say, no, sir. And they refuse to take the death penalty off the table.
Good.
Right? They were like, no, like, you're fine.
Thank you for playing. You are going to have the death penalty.
Yeah. Nice try, but no.
Good, so finally, he's going to be held accountable.
Yeah. It takes, a murder before they're like, oh, geez, this guy's not very good. There wasn't a whole lot of info on, like, the court proceedings. And aside from, like, the fingerprint and DNA evidence, it seemed that the state was relying heavily on the testimony of Renzo and Irish because she's dead now and there's no other, there wasn't a whole lot of, like, evidence other than that. So, for the defense, at the close of the state's case, which the state pretty much just, like I said, had the DNA and the fingerprint evidence, and then they had the testimony of Renzo and Irish, and that was kind of where they ended. But at the close of the state's case, and Maestas had been found in the beginning to obviously be competent, and so he had a lot to do. Like, he got to direct his trial, kind of. So a lot of the stuff, it doesn't say, like, the lawyers filed the motion or whatever. They always say Maestas. So I think he was, like, kind of in charge. He had lawyers, but I think he was kind of trying to run the show. I don't know. But it says that he filed a motion for a directed verdict, stating the state had not proven that the murder was committed in an especially heinous manner or that it was committed during an attempt to commit forcible sexual abuse. He also stated the state had not proven that he had the requisite intent to support aggravated murder. So from what I could find on directed verdicts was that he was trying to get it almost to where, like, they don't go to sentencing and they just, like, they say, the state did their case. They didn't prove, like, enough that this was heinous and that he had the intent for aggravated murder, and so he should get a verdict that's a little bit lesser, and so he can get, like, a lesser sentence. But the court said, no, we don't care. That's not true. Too bad. You are getting charged with all of the above. He also, at one point, tried to state that Renzo and Irish had stolen his car, committed all the crimes, and framed him. Even though, during the investigation, Maestas was questioned twice, and both times he insisted no one else drove his car, and that it was him that was driving it the night it was abandoned. So
I changed my mind. I really wasn't there.
Yeah, so, and during that questioning was when the detective noticed that, like, his arms and hands were, like, super cut up and scraped, and, like, so they had lab technicians take all of, like, the DNA evidence and stuff from him during those times that he was in there being questioned. So that didn't really hold up. So during closing arguments, the prosecution stated that if Mr. Maestas, because he was still kind of complaining about the whole DNA evidence thing, and they said if he really disputed the DNA evidence, then he and his counsel should have tested it themselves, because they have the right to do that, and they didn't. So they were pretty much like, well, if you don't like the DNA evidence,
the basis of their
what we did,
and they're like,
then maybe you should have tested it yourself to show that, it's not reliable. So all in all, the trial lasted 6 days, and I'm not sure how long it took for them to reach a verdict because I couldn't find any information on that either. But in the end, Floyd Eugene Maestas was found guilty of aggravated murder of Donna Lou Bott and the aggravated burglary of Virginia Chamberlain. So regarding
Regurgitating?
regarding the murder charge, this is what the jury found. That 1, the murder was committed in the course of an aggravated burglary. 2, the murder was committed in the course of aggravated robbery. 3, the murder was committed in the course of an attempt to commit forcible sexual abuse. And 4, the murder was committed in an especially heinous, atrocious, cruel, and exceptionally depraved manner.
Amen.
Mic drop. So, yeah, they found that, everything he had done was terrible, awful, horrible, cruel, mean, gross, disgusting.
Well, the fact that they tried to argue that it wasn't
right?
in a heinous manner.
Yeah.
What do you consider more heinous than that?
Right? You stomped a woman until her heart exploded, essentially.
Was she 79?
Something like that. Like
a 79-year-old elderly woman.
You stomped someone
until her aorta tore.
Yeah. She had tearing in her heart and her aorta. And if that was something that was like the run-of-the-mill thing that happened when you had like blunt force trauma to your chest, we'd see it a lot more. Because people get beat to death a lot.
Your aorta is like the main artery in your entire body. And your body does a pretty good job at protecting it.
For sure.
There's lots of stuff around it to protect it.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to get a crush injury and cause tearing of the aorta.
Yeah. Well, and one of the accounts said that he was wearing cowboy boots.
Oh.
Yeah, and that to me, I was just like, oh, like, it just steps it up a little bit more. So during the penalty phase, gosh, I have a hard time talking. The jury had reached its verdict, and now the state was trying to prove that death was an appropriate penalty, since he was trying to, like, say that it wasn't. So they introduced not only the victim impact statements, but they also introduced his history of criminal conduct as both a youth and an adult. They included pictures of Donna Lou Bott's bedroom and her body when she was found. And they included testimony from his prison caseworker and his AP&P officer. So I'm guessing that neither his parole officer nor his caseworker had anything like nice to say about him if the state was using their testimony to show that the death penalty was appropriate. So it didn't say what they said, but I'm guessing it was,
not good.
Yeah. So after that, as a defendant, you have the opportunity to provide evidence, like, for yourself, right? So mitigating evidence. And he declined the opportunity to introduce that. And when you do that, like, they have to also go through a trial to prove that, like, you're competent, you understand, like, the importance of your mitigating evidence, because it can, you can have, like, your family, you can have all these people come in, you can show some evidence to prove, like, see, I'm really not a terrible person. And they had to go through a trial to, like, make sure that he understood everything. They found that he was very competent, he understood, and he said he didn't want to provide any evidence because a lot of it, I think, was his family, and he didn't want to get them involved. And that was where, like, it had said something about, like, there was some stuff in there about him being molested or him, like, maybe sleeping with one of his sisters. There was, like, stuff in there, and he didn't want. And I think they were trying to show that, like, see, he was assaulted as a child, and so, this is what's happened to him as an adult, but he didn't want any of that to be put into evidence. So they didn't do any of his mitigating evidence. He spoke briefly to the jury and told them how he didn't commit the crime and he was innocent. But that was all he said. He didn't testify in his own defense, which is pretty uncommon. A lot of people do testify, and he did not. So,
from what I've read, you should never testify.
Right, and I think it depends.
In your own defense, because it's like you set yourself up so much to cross-examination.
For sure.
It's like not ever recommended.
For sure. Yeah, and it depends, because they were saying that the prosecution had come out and said something about him, like, not wanting to testify and, like, what that said about him. But so during deliberation, the jury wrote a note to the judge, asking if the parole board could overrule the penalty of life without parole. So the judge wrote back and just directed them to read the jury instruction number 12 that states, if a person is sentenced to life in prison without parole, this means that he will never be eligible for parole and will spend the remainder of his life in prison. So the judge informed counsel of the note and his response before any verdict had been read in court. The defense counsel did not object at the time, but then did 5 days later, trying to say that, like, that was, like, not appropriate and that they wanted, you know, like, essentially almost like a mistrial because I don't even know. But they waited 5 days, like, after the sentence was read, and they were like, wait a minute. And that's what I say, like, they're trying to come back and, like, find any little thing possible to, I think, get stuff in his case overturned.
Just reminds me of, like, when you're having a conversation and then you go home and you think about it and you're like, man, I wish I would have said this. Like, why didn't I think of that witty response?
Yeah, it's exactly what happened. They were like, oh man.
Sorry. Can we rewind a little bit?
Remember when they told us about that note? We totally should have objected that.
Totally. Why didn't you do that? That would have been so smart.
I thought you would have objected. Well, I thought you did. So the court said, no. It was untimely, and eventually he was just sentenced to death. They were like, no, you can't. Like, it's been 5 days.
No takebacks. Sorry.
Over the years, he tried a lot of things to appeal his case. There was a lot that I was kind of looking into, and it was really like, I don't know. He would be like, juror 12, like, did this, and juror 20 did this, and juror 50 did, like, it was just the most ridiculous, like, so stupid. And I think his last appeal was in 2012, and they were all denied, every single one of them. He was one of 9 people on death row here in Utah, and not one of them at that time had or has a date of death, which is always so frustrating to me. It's like he's been on at the time. Okay, so I'll finish and then I'll come back. So in December 2018, he died of natural causes in the Utah State Prison at the age of 63. And he'd been serving, obviously, a death penalty, but he'd been in there for 10 years. So what I was going to say was, like, he's been in prison for 10 years, and his last appeal was in 2012. So then it's been, like, 6 years, and we still haven't given him, like, a date. Like, okay, last appeal, 2012, we're good. Everything's done. Like, sign the paper. Like, why do we got to keep paying for them to be in prison?
Right, and, like, the prisons are crazy. So overcrowded.
Right.
And for me, I don't know. I always go back and forth on the death penalty. I do think it's like a case by case
for sure.
thing
Yeah,
for me.
For sure. Yeah, so I definitely feel that way with the death penalty. It's not always just cut and dry. So side note here for everybody, as we were just talking, my battery on my computer died, so we had to stop for a brief second. And while I was doing that, Lindsay happened to look up this fun little fact, so I'm going to have her read it to you guys.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I wonder what the average time between sentencing and execution is. And this is from npr.org, and it says the average time between sentencing and execution has increased by 2/3 in the past 20 years. From 11.4 years in 2000 to 18.9 years in 2020.
That's insane.
And that's from the most recent available data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics.
I even feel like 11 years is a long time to sit on death row, but 18... I know,
because he was 10, so he was actually under the average.
Yeah. Like, over 18 years?
Yeah, like almost 19 years is the average now.
What is the purpose of the death penalty then? Like, that's my thought. And I do believe there are some people that really, truly need to have the death penalty. But what is the purpose if they're just going to sit there for 20 years, 20 plus years?
Yeah, and we are paying for this.
For sure.
Like, our tax dollars go to their care.
I mean, obviously...
And feeding them and housing them.
Right.
And staffing the prisons. And
and
I feel like if they're
medical care, medications.
If they have exhausted all of their options, which I think everybody has the right to do,
for sure,
and get your execution stayed, all of those things, but if they have exhausted all of those options, why are we letting them stay in there for years and years and years and years?
Yeah.
When we could be using those resources, like in his early years, I'll bet a lot of the reason he got out on parole early was because they were overpopulated at the prisons.
Yeah.
And understaffed, which is a huge issue.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure people are going to be, you can never make everyone happy. So I'm sure someone's going to write in, if we get any listeners, to tell us what terrible people we are for thinking any of this. But in my, like I said, his last appeal was 2012. It had been 6 years until he died. I don't think he was doing anything else. Like, what is the purpose of having him sit there for 6 years with no date of execution, but he's no longer filing appeals? Like, what is the purpose? Why do we have him here? Like, if he's exhausted his last appeal and it just has been denied over and over, then it's time to sign that date of execution and, like, carry out the sentence that was given to him by the justice system. Yeah, so I think it's unfair completely. Because so I'm going to read one last thing, and this was from one of his lawyers after he died, and it kind of makes me want to find this guy and punch him in the throat. So, and when you read these cases, I don't know how many lawyers you have, but I feel like every time I read something about his lawyers, it was a different name. So I don't know how many freaking lawyers he had, but after he died, one of his lawyers, Samuel P. Newton, tweeted, and I don't have Twitter, so I'm not in on the cool crowd, but he said, "R.I.P. Floyd Maestas. Sorry we never quite won the fight. I'm glad you can finally rest. Cancer knows no boundaries." So, first off, like, sorry we never won the fight. Like, what fight? He raped and murdered old ladies.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
Away with it for years and years and years and years and years in his youth. So, like, no, it was time.
Yeah, and then it said, cancer knows no boundaries. So, because most of the reports I read said, like, they didn't say what he died of. It was just natural causes. So, I'm guessing it was cancer, if that's what his lawyer wrote. So, we paid for his cancer treatment? Because they probably did something. They probably, they had to test him. They had to figure it out. Like, all of that is us having to pay for, like, his care after he raped and murdered women repeatedly, gouged out a woman's eye, ripped off another woman's nipple, like, all of these terrible, horrible things, and then we're supposed to, like, pay for him to have medical care. It just frustrates me.
Can I tell you, so I used to work in oncology,
mm-hmm.
and seeing people who can't afford to get their cancer treated,
for sure,
is one of the worst things ever. And we have lots of programs, but a lot of prisoners get better care than a lot of our elderly people, or it doesn't even have to be elderly people, just people in general.
For sure.
But especially elder people, because once you go on Medicare, they're basically like, nope, let's go to pasture. We're not going to pay for this or this or this because you're this age group.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely terrible.
Yeah. Well, and, my mom was not healthy through most of her life. Terrible asthma, smoker, all the stuff that you should do when you have asthma. And a lot of times she always had jobs, but she usually worked somewhere that, like, didn't offer insurance, or she couldn't afford the insurance, and so she was uninsured most of the time. And just seeing the level of care she would get without insurance, as opposed to if she did have insurance, was interesting too,
Yeah, it's terrible.
See, like, how, like, oh, you don't have any insurance? Okay, well, we'll do the very bare minimum so you don't die when you walk out the door. But if you have insurance, it's like, oh, no, you need to stay in the hospital. Like, you're so sick. So it is frustrating when you see that, like, people who might be hardworking or, single moms. Like, my mom was a single mom, like, most of my life. And seeing, that a rapist, murderer can get better care than a single mom who's just, working what jobs she can is frustrating.
Yeah, for sure.
So
our system is broken in so many ways. I think we just went off on a soapbox tangent.
We did.
It's just broken.
Well, and I'm sure, like, I don't know the ins and outs of other countries, but I'm sure everywhere you look, they have their benefits and their, you know, the things that need to change and be fixed, and you know, an overhaul of the justice system would be a big undertaking.
Yeah,
I think we could make some serious improvements, but I think, you know, we do what we can, I guess. But anyway, so
I'm glad it ended up with him
dying.
Justice served.
Yeah.
After so many mishaps.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely like a frustrating case as I kept reading and researching and being like, what? Like, how is this possible?
Yeah.
It was so interesting. So
yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you continue to listen. I promise we'll get better as each episode goes. We
will. We really do. Or we're like those type of people that just grow on you a little bit each time. So, you know, just keep coming back.
Yeah. Keep coming back, and
prepare yourself for next week, because next week is absolutely brutal.
It is. It's a rough one. So you can follow us on Facebook at
Sinners Among Saints Podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram at
Sinners Among Saints Podcast.
And you can send us an email at
sinnersamongsaintspodcast@gmail.com.